just check one too. Create my own light. Like Vanilla Ice said, if you turn the lights off, I will in fact glow. All right, so once again, we're back with everybody's favorite topic. Once again, this is more of a podcast thing, but I will have, I do have quite a few slides that I'm going to put up for this one, so you might want to watch a little bit of this one. You don't have to watch. I will show. So I'm not just throwing numbers at you. I will put the slides up on the screen, but I will also tell you the numbers too. So you don't necessarily, as long as you trust me, either way. So you don't necessarily have to watch this. But anyway, to quickly catch everyone up after USBC's sham of a poll, how poorly it was done, and then how obviously biased or slanted the results were presented, I decided to hold one for us to see what the differences were, what represents a valid survey, what is still critically flawed with ours, and how to interpret data. I have several slides to go through as I let the poll go for a solid week. It was on my community tab, and I did get several screenshots throughout the first day of polling at certain junctures to compare to the final results and see what represents a legitimate sample size. First of all, the poll collected 1,900 votes, give or take, since YouTube just rounds to the nearest 100. Let's just call it that for easy math. I have 29,400 subscribers, so this is about a 6.5% sample size. Now, a few considerations here. I don't think probably half of my subscribers are still active or watch anything I post anymore. A lot of people will do this thinking it helps when it's actually the opposite. It's very harmful to a channel for people to remain subbed but not watch anything. But that's not this video, so back on topic. But basically, just because the numbers work out a certain way on paper doesn't necessarily mean you can trust them. I'd estimate that I have something closer to 15,000, let's just call it that are still somewhat active or at least watch a video here or there. So the sample size is probably closer to 13% of the audience that it was realistically going to reach. Now, this is also a specific audience. I'm not particularly entertaining, and I draw a pretty specific crowd. As you can see on the screen here, my audience is 97% male, and most of my audience is over 30. I tend to draw a more serious and involved crowd, or I don't have a lot of casual viewers just watching for the entertainment, if any. I have more serious and active bowlers, whether they're just starting out or have been doing it for years. When I was with Storm, that's something that they recognized and mentioned. Even though I didn't get Darren Tang numbers, people watching my videos were more serious about the game and equipment, so 100 of my views might be more valuable to them than 1,000 of Darren's. Now, I can take these considerations and pull several positives and negatives right away. First, the larger the sample size, the more accurate the results, but you can see that at a certain point, it kind of levels out. At 100 votes, while the numbers did eventually change, they didn't change much. 300 votes was about the same size, or 300 votes was about the same. And by the time that we got to 1,000, they had stabilized and were virtually identical to what we ended up with, almost double that number. Also, we got to 1,900 votes by Thursday. I put the poll up on a Sunday, and by Thursday we had 1,900, and the numbers never changed after that. So the voting was basically completed in 4 days, with 1,000 of those votes coming in the first day. If you were going to see it and be interested in voting or commenting, you did so within the first few days. So the two things that I wasn't concerned with in USBC's survey was the sample size and the length. If you were going to see their survey and vote on it, that most likely happened in the first couple days. And realistically, I ended up with a fully representative sample in the first 12-ish hours. I think I got to 1,000 votes before I went to bed the day I posted the poll. I put it up at 8:30 a.m. All my screenshots that I took by day, also how I set an alarm on my phone. I did remember actually to get the screenshots at 8:30 each day. So it was each 24-hour period. USBC cast a much wider net than I did by posting on social media accounts and sending emails out, while I just put up a single post in my community and then intentionally did not share it on social media. Again, due to my pronunciation of this. sometimes you write things down and it doesn't like roll off your, you can just click things out and type them. And then when you're actually speaking them, they're a little more difficult to, anyway. Again, due to my community demographics, I think a much larger percentage of people who voted on my poll had a much deeper understanding of what they were voting on. I think that's fairly obvious because my results were similar to USBC's on a couple of the answers, but wildly different on the others. This is both a good and a bad thing. USBC was admittedly weighing the results of the poll heavily based on their comments. They said that 57% of people thought a change was needed, so therefore they thought new or updated governance was needed. If you're just gathering information or looking for general public opinion, you want to cast a wide net, because even if people don't really understand what they're voting on, that's still part of it. They're still members of USBC. So whether or not it affects them doesn't really, they're still members. So even if they don't understand what the hell they're voting on, that's still information to take into consideration. You still want opinions from these people because that gives you an idea how many people a change would be affecting. A lot of people are already tired of this topic and really don't care what gets changed or adjusted. That's information too. And it's even something I'm considering when it comes to future videos. Most of you are sick of this topic, so this will probably be the last video I do about this for a while until USBC makes some kind of announcement about a rules change. The problem with our poll is that it catches too large a percentage of affected people. And you might say, well, good, you're getting feedback from the people this is actually affecting. And that's important to have, sure. But you can also see how much different of a story it tells. USBC's net was too wide and not wide enough at the same time, and mine was definitely pretty specific in terms of audience. They probably caught too many randoms, and I probably didn't catch enough. So neither of us got a truly representative sample of the entire USBC membership that a rule change would be affecting, even indirectly. Now, from USBC's direction, if you're concerned with higher level, more serious, more competitive events, why are you asking people this doesn't affect? You're going to get people replying that have no idea what you're talking about to begin with, debating points like urethane carry down versus reactive carry down from their own house shot, 22 mil volume, one person throwing urethane perspective, rather than the sport pattern 30 mil, everyone throwing urethane perspective, which is night and day. So you're severely skewing the results right up front, because most of the people taking the poll have no idea what you're actually talking about because you weren't specific enough. Also, cover type doesn't determine flare amount, differential does. So if we're concerned about carry down, why are we including a ball like the IQ78, which flares just like an IQ Tour, which doesn't create nearly as much carry down as a purple hammer? Because if the part of the ball that has the oil on it doesn't touch the lane again, how can it create carry down? So the fact that we're picking on urethane specifically here and not low flaring balls doesn't make a lot of sense either. I understand that we're also concerned about the cover getting softer, but that's not the only thing. That was only one of the like 4 or 5 points that they had. The other points were, oh, it creates carry down and people rely on it too much and whatever. And it's like, well, that's a low flaring urethane problem. That's not a high flaring urethane problem, but I digress. From my direction, seeing the results before you answer the question could also affect your answer, or seeing the current numbers could influence you to go with the majority or the minority, depending on your personality. I know a lot of you are also over the topic too. You're sick of hearing about it, so that could affect your vote as well. However, YouTube also only allows one vote per account, which is quite a bit more difficult or involved, I guess is a better way to put it, than simply getting. If you have, you may or may not have additional YouTube accounts, but signing in, signing out, whatever is more involved than getting around the one vote per IP address nonsense. Now, neither poll, mine or USBC's, neither one randomized the answers either. Mine didn't because YouTube doesn't offer that option, and theirs didn't because they just don't understand how surveys and randomization work. 5-second Google search completely rejects the lack of logic they gave for their question order. Question order does matter, and it does bias people. Some people will unknowingly latch onto the first thing that they see that sounds good or stands out to them, no matter what else they read later. And some people intentionally gloss over the first couple, thinking that they're being more thorough by making sure that they give every answer a fair chance. The best way to read something like this, though, is to read one question at a time and think it through before moving on and judging what you think about it. This way, you're giving each answer equal thought. Rather, you're opening and closing the book on each one of them rather than just reading them all first and then coming back. what I actually think about this individual question or statement independent of itself. That way, again, you open and close the book on everything individually before you come to your final decision. My question order was at least randomized. I did use the same questions USBC did, minus the dumb I don't have an opinion option. So you take the first question on my list: should urethane be allowed completely, or do I think the current rules are fine? Do you agree or not agree with that? Next, do we ban urethane completely? Think it through. Question 3, ban it, but just for the bigger tournaments at the top. Think about that. And then finally, do we allow it to continue, but adjust the rules and adopt the PBA 78 hardness rule? Once you've thought through all of those questions individually, then you can go back, look at them as a group, and decide which answer you identified the most with. Now, I'd say most people had already thought about it and knew what their decision was, because you already saw the USBC poll, you knew what the options were going into it. So I think a lot of you probably just beeline straight for an answer, which is fine. But if you took something I'd like to know is, if you took both the USBC poll and my poll, did your answer change did it change from your answer on the USBC poll to what you answered on my poll? Did it change based on discussion or information that you learned between those two polls? Did you learn anything that changed your perspective, or were you already firmly set in your decision regardless? Now let's break the answers down. USBC only presented their results from one angle, and that's the angle of saying 57% of people, or the majority, thought a change was needed. Now, barely above 50% doesn't constitute much of a majority. It's enough to elect a president, so it counts, but there are several other ways to interpret the data, and there's a critical flaw in their grouping of categories. We talked about this in the other video, but banning urethane completely and allowing it but updating the rules fundamentally don't go together, because you're putting the "I hate urethane" in any and all forms, and I think it needs to be erased, in with the group that thinks the Black Hammer and IQ 78 are perfectly fine. The ban urethane group fundamentally disagrees with that. You can't put groups like that together. The ban it completely group is their own entity. They're not going to be happy with a rule change or anything less than it being gone, because if it still exists, even at 78 hardness, it fixes exactly zero of the problems that USBC identified in the first place. You won't stop cheating or tampering. You're not changing the lane transition. You're not changing the player imbalance aspect whatsoever, and developing players will still rely on it and be one-dimensional. This once again goes back to, are you actually interested in the results and gaining information, or are you just looking for numbers to support your agenda and what you already wanted to do? And I think they very loudly confirm the latter. So let's compare the numbers here. The allow it, my numbers, our numbers. The allow it completely category is virtually the same. So about 1/3 of our votes and USBC's votes said it's fine the way it is, leave it alone. Now, our ban urethane completely number is much lower. The number was about double in USBC's poll of what it is in ours. Very low also for the ban it for big tournaments. I think that was going to be the least popular, because it just doesn't make a lot of sense. You can't use it at all in the big stuff, but otherwise make no changes to anything else for anybody else. That's kind of dumb. So the most popular answer in our poll was adopt the 78D PBA rule, which gets rid of the purple hammer and pitch black, but it splits the gap. It updates the rules to adjust, but still thinks urethane is a valid part of the current bowling meta. In USBC's poll, it was much lower, only 17% in theirs versus 41% in ours, and I think that's what reflects the difference in knowledge and experience of the voters. A much higher percentage in their poll were quick to demonize urethane and say get rid of it, or say don't change a thing, or basically the most represented opinions in their poll were the extremes. Now, to be fair, it is a polarizing question, but it can indicate a more ignorant group overall. Now, I'm not saying that you're ignorant if your opinion was one of the extremes. It's just hitting a talking point here for consideration. But if you end up with a sizable amount of answers that are on one end or the other, I don't think most of those voters or most of those votes are informed or fairly rationalized. They tend to be more the knee-jerk, I love it or I hate it answers that weren't objectively thought out. Now, we're going to do that here, though, because personally, I have no vote. I have a lot of thoughts on every possible outcome and would be perfectly fine with any of them for several different reasons. First off, let's look at not changing a thing. Let's just let it ride. And I don't think it's that bad for the vast majority of people. I think the cheating is a concern. So if we leave it alone, on site testing needs to happen. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. That does include some cost and some issues for a lot of tournament directors below the upper levels. They may not want to mess with that. Some may just ignore the issue. Some may elect to ban urethane from their tournaments because that's easier than, testing and much more time and cost efficient too. You thought it took a while to check into some tournaments before. You, the bowler, are also in complete control of what you bowl. Now, you can't always account for the randoms here and there who throw a urethane on a house shot in league or at the city tournament, but you also can't account for when people play the lanes wrong with reactive balls and screw the lanes up a whole different way either. Bowling the way it is now is constantly at the mercy of the unknown and literally thousands of variables that go into every shot that you throw. Problems will still exist higher up. I guarantee they'll be out testing in full force at junior gold and nationals regardless. So one step forward, not having to waste up at net. So, we got one step forward, not having to waste stuff at nationals anymore, but now one step back, having your urethane's hardness tested. So let's look at banning it completely now. I think it'd solve a lot of problems, but it also create a lot of problems because now you're leaving people without a perfectly viable tool to combat certain conditions. If one piece of equipment is the easy button on most conditions, I look at the conditions and not the tool, because if you watch Brunsnick's silent film the other day, even the purple hammer isn't autopilot for everybody on everything. It still only fits a limited window of conditions. Anything heavier and flatter, it'll destroy. So why can't we get more creative with pattern design? This has been a problem for years now all over the world, and we're still designing patterns the same way, wondering why it's getting more out of hand. This also creates issues for lefties because they're not bowling on something side appropriate. They're bowling on something that's designed for traffic and transition and carry down on the right side. That's usually only, even if it is an asymmetric pattern, it's usually only slightly modified. I've said all this before, but quick synopsis: less traffic on the left means the lane surface stays newer longer, which means less friction, which means less stability on the left and more shape down lane. Now, lefties, you've seen lefties get a purple hammer look like a reactive ball because it's not hooking as early, so it has more left to do down lane. I think we'd see short pin reactive balls more, of course, but short pins aren't, this is something I will fight somebody on. Short pin reactive balls are not remotely similar to urethane. They're not even a poor substitute. You'd think that if they were, we'd already be seeing more of them, but we don't. Reactive covers do not behave anything like urethane covers. They don't see the lane the same way. Short pinning a ball also doesn't result in urethane-like core numbers either. Plus, reactive balls lane shine significantly quicker. I would think that lane conditions could be designed to be more realistic again if we went this direction. They wouldn't have to be so punishing and brutal to kind of slow down urethane. I'm not convinced that would happen. By USBC's own statement, this option is completely off the table. We're just still walking through that idea. Now, banning urethane for just the top stuff, basically what we talked about. What we just talked about, because either way, it doesn't affect most of you. The vast majority of you watching are league bowlers who hit a few tournaments a year that you don't throw urethane at anyway. You're not professionals. You're not bowling junior gold, and you might bowl nationals, but it's once a year, and you may not throw urethane there anyway, and probably suck there regardless. Neither banning option really moves the needle for you because we just don't really deal with it much. The worst outcome here for most people is not, if we're banning it or banning it for the top stuff, it'd be not being able to throw urethane at spares anymore, because I know quite a few people do that. I did it myself for a while. Now, sure, I know that there are outliers. A lot of people with injuries or switching hands or getting older, and urethane is about all they can control. For them, it'd be different, but that's realistically a pretty small percentage. Now, you don't really care what the numbers look like if you're one of the ones affected, but, for the sake of argument, the last option seems the most likely. Adopt the PBA rule, ultimately change nothing, but hey, we can act like we did something now. The black hammer is still great. It's not a purple, but it's the top urethane choice when you're restricted to 78D. The problem here is that the gap between the black and the IQ78 is even bigger than the gap between the purple and the pitch black. So the manufacturer gap would get wider there. If the rule is adopted overseas, instead of seeing purples everywhere, we just see blacks everywhere. And like I said earlier, literally nothing changes but the color of the ball. All the Storm staffers or loyalists that used to at least get to use the pitch black are now stuck with the IQ78. And while it has its moments, it's just not consistently competitive. And the level on the new blue hammer just aren't what they were supposed to be. So those just, I don't think those would factor in. All USBC's identified problems and why they were even looking at it in the first place go completely unaddressed and stay unresolved, even though I think this is probably what's going to happen. They're going to do something, so it's probably just go to the higher hardness, but it just doesn't change anything, really. It does, but it doesn't. So after all this nonsense, now we're going to blow it all to hell. I don't think now that even though what I just said, they might go to the 78 hardness, but I'm not actually sure they're going to do anything. And they said so themselves in their report. Now, let me read this for you again and then tell you what they're really saying. A complete ban on urethane would be a complicated transition for consumers and ball manufacturers. USBC is mindful of the impact that such major governance would have on membership and the industry. USBC is not considering revocation of approved balls or rules that would prohibit urethane balls from USBC leagues or tournaments that choose to allow them. USBC is also not considering changes that would justify a return or refund for any bowling ball. I also said this in my last video, but just to reiterate and drive the point home, this means that they can't or won't ever make a decision with any real impact. So let me say this loud and clear for everyone. Urethane is going nowhere. Two-handers are going nowhere. String pins are going nowhere. Reactive balls are going nowhere. Take it or leave it. Today's bowling environment is here to stay, and they knew this before they even put anything out there. It will continue to slide. It will continue to regress. And if you're my age or older, they don't want you anymore because you remember bowling in better days, and they don't want you here poisoning the well for future generations who don't know any better. This is why we've had such a major youth push over the last 10 years or so. A lot more high school bowling, more collegiate bowling, Storm Youth Championships. Brunswick started something up that direction too. Junior Gold is almost its own singularity now. It used to be a prestigious thing you had to qualify for, but hey, that doesn't bring in enough money, so let's just give away spots like we're on Oprah. I think it's bigger than Bowl Expo now. You have all the manufacturers there and their pro staffers and dozens of college recruiters. They correctly recognize, the industry as a whole, recognize that they weren't investing enough in the youth, and the youth to adult bowler conversion rate is very low too. But if you get them hooked early enough, they'll stick with it, while the adult bowling experience dips enough to get rid of the old timers or the people who don't want to assimilate. I don't think this is some industry-wide conspiracy that's quite this dark or intentional, but it's clear that decisions have been made about the future, and those decisions don't include integrity of the sport on their list. You also have to think that if USBC does make any significant decisions, people don't have to sanction. Most people already wonder what they're paying for to begin with. Not sanctioning changes relatively little outside of extreme and rare situations, and most leagues and tournaments that don't sanction still say that they use the USBC rule set. We've all been to tournaments that said, oh, this tournament isn't sanctioned, but we're still abiding by USBC rules or whatever. USBC would stand to lose a lot of money if people stop sanctioning because of a decision that they made. And if people don't sanction, they don't go to nationals, and they lose out on the several $1,000,000 in profit that they make on that tournament every year. But that's another video. Now, hopefully this helped to illustrate the issues with what they did, how they did it, and the result of the entire situation. It really couldn't have been done more poorly, inaccurately, or even deceitfully. But honestly, I think they were trying to be transparent here. They're just unfortunately so inept that it looks like deceit and corruption. I'm starting to think more and more that accusing them of gaslighting and ulterior motives is giving them too much credit. Anyway, that's what I got for this one. Thanks for watching, and may the strikes be with you.